So on to the next speaker. We have the first speaker from the opposition team. Inaya, you may start your speech in 3, 2,
Wait. Sorry, I have to set my timer. Okay.
I'll check once again. Are you ready to speak?
Yeah.
Yes, I will stop in 3, 2, 1.
There, understand that the government side of the house is lack of explaining how exactly the mechanism of how they're going to significantly lower the standard of the evidence required to prove the crime itself, right? Because we question like, how do you mean with the little evidence? Is it like a video, pictures, or like recording that is that's taken on the crime scene itself, right? For example, and also how they actually how they need to prove like how exactly by lowering the standard, the victims can be more protected, because we also under our side of the house we agree that we have to support the victims, but under their side of the house they only talk to you about how they can have more victims reporting to the court, for example. Yeah, but how exactly it's going to be look like, right? Okay, before I get to my arguments, one point of rebuttal, like as I stated before, they with how exactly the evidence that they want to bring, right? Because, for example, from the smartphone of the victims and so on, like for example, like where whatever a human come to police, for example, reporting harassment, like how is it? How can they say that it is already a valid statement? For example, like every little evidence they talking there is not really that elaborated enough, right? And secondly, like take it for example, in the dark alleyways there has to be, for example, a CCTV recording, but maybe not in the same street, but at least recording where they go in the same place, for example, like, and so on, right? But yeah, let's get into my arguments. We agree to the government side of the house character of like what do they mean by the definition of the sexual harassment itself, right? I said that but what they don't notice is that there are a lot of there are a lot of spectrum of the victims itself. We say that there are two characters, for example, like the victims are there because of the perpetrator itself. Like for example, the perpetrator can be called a perpetrator if it's not if it's done for example multiple times without, for example, any consent from the victims, or if they do it consciously, right? And then we say that there are a lot of kind of people, for example, like victims who are brave enough to speak up, to report to the police, or but some of them also like not wanting to speak up because they want to keep it to themselves, and only um, um, they will let it go as time goes, right? But we, as the opposition side of the house, what we stand here is that we're not going to significantly lower the standard of evidence required to prove the crime, but we stick to the status quo, where the status quo is already progressing. And we said that it's not only the problem is not only because of the victim's lack of evidence, right? Because what is more problematic is that the implementation of the law, for example, the implementation of the justice system itself. When some victim came to police to ask for help, like I have when they came to the police station, for example, to ask for help, where they already need a lot of courage to do that, and the police only saying that that's because your clothes are open, and so on and so forth. Like we see nowadays, the people still has this stigmas and bad thoughts about the victims itself, right? And there's the house, there are two mechanisms that we're going to do, because first we're going to improve the stakeholders, improve the justice system, as I said before, like the police, the witnesses, for example, like the society, and then so that it can make the faster bureaucracy when people want to report can directly process and so on, and so that to make because what we want here is also like the goal is to so that the perpetrator deserve what they want, right? Punish, for example, or like get the verdict as they have to have, right? And what is actually the urgency of this existence of this standard, right? Because the standards are used for the comparison to establish a link between the crime scene evidence and the individuals involved. For example, like there are two types of standards nowadays. For example, like witnesses, or like the and second is the evidence. For example, pictures, videos, or forensics. For example, DNAs taken from the crime scene, right? But we say that it is under our side of the house. We say that this standard is really urgent to have, because you can have this to make more objective result of the court, for example. Like, but understand that what we mean by we're going to improve the justice system so that it can make the system to be better, and even more victims can also be. Reports can also be processed, right? So getting to my arguments first on why significantly lower the standard is not really solutive, and the second, how it can be more effective under our side of the house in terms of the implementation itself, right? First of all, understand that the implementation, as I said before, the implementation of this law is not only problematic by the side of the lack of evidence of the victims. The government side of the house might say that they can judge more victims' cases, for example. Yes, we concede that they can do that under the house, but under our side of the house, as the status quo is also progressing, for example, notice that in social media, for example, when one case is getting viral, a lot of victims, a lot of people are also become braver to speak up, right? But we said that when this is also, it's not a problem anymore that the victims is only. It is the choice of the victims to actually report to the police. But the problem is you need to improve the system itself, improve the stakeholders that involved, right? For example, we're going to do like educating the police, for example, like or like breaking the stigmas in the society, making more like a campaign or like so on and so forth, like, and so that society can be more aware of this happening, and so that they will not blaming the victims without and the victims can be more braver in getting to speak up with their case, right? But secondly, how it can be effective, because under the house, we're so proud to propose.
So the first speaker from the opposition round, I'll take notes that they spent 7 minutes and 22 seconds. I call upon the second speaker from the government team, Ms. Bianca. You may start your speech in 3, 2, 1.
Ladies and gentlemen panels, the opposition seems to have not understood what are exactly the characteristics of a sexual harassment case in which our side of the government have outlined. Before we go on to my riddles, here's what they've actually missed, right? They have yet to consider what actually happens or what is most likely to happen in a sexual harassment case. It's not as easy as you think to gather evidence when you're not expecting to be sexually harassed. It can happen. It can happen behind closed doors. It can happen in dark alleyways. There can be mental, psychological, physical restraint that prevents one from actually not consenting or consenting at all. And there's also the case of marriage rape, in which people have a lot of stigma over and they even consider that to be rape. Ladies and gentlemen, let me first rebut what the government have stated. They have tried to convince you that in our side of the house that we don't have a benefit for the victims itself, right? But we have mentioned it. We have given you the very benefit that it gives, right? That this motion gives is that it allows us to report to actually have more valid reports, right? Why is this better? Because now the crimes that are already underreported in the first place, now we have better statistics about what's actually happening. The perpetrators are now more likely to be punished, and that the victims who are not reporting because of many reasons that my first speaker have outlined can now actually have a better chance of getting a valid report. Now, they have also mentioned that victims keep to themselves, and this is the very reason that we are proposing for this motion, because victims keep for themselves. There are many evidence they have to provide to convince a judge, to convince a police, to convince a neighbor that their experience was valid. We are reaching out to these victims, to the most vulnerable actors who are impacted by this law and was not protected by it. And you've also mentioned stigma. Yes, thank you for mentioning it, because that is also the very reason why this is still a problem in the first place. You have mentioned bureaucracy and how the police ask. Well, let me tell you, this because of bias, right? And the bias does not just go with this law, but we need to make sure that the law covers for these biases. We need to make sure that, your evidence is not enough. It's not going to be a response anymore. That, that doesn't prove anything. It's not going to happen anymore. Now on to my main point. Ladies and gentlemen, our first speaker has first brought you the point that this House significantly lowering the standard of evidence required to prove a sexual harassment crime validates and covers through more sexual harassment cases that would have been ignored by the current standard. Now, here we are focusing most on the impact of the most vulnerable actor. Right? Currently, the standards are pretty high, as what my first speaker have mentioned. You have to give proof of communications. You have to give your company's policies. You have to give, data this, DNA. So what is the likelihood of somebody actually expecting to be raped, expecting to be catcalled, expecting to be harassed, and be prepared and be holding a phone in their own entire way home? That's what the proposition is supporting. That the victim have to be prepared for every single moment of their life to be sexually harassed. Are you going to not want to cater to this? These are the people that we are trying to help, that the law is interested in, are the people who are the most vulnerable in the situation. Now, you have also in the sexual harassment case as well, right? What is the likelihood that this actually happens in the time that you expect? Basically none. You don't expect for this kind of thing to happen. You should not expect for this kind of thing to happen. Ladies and gentlemen, the current standards are the ones that put most of the blame on the victim. They're the ones that have to provide everything. They're the ones who have to provide the evidence for them to even fight for themselves, right? Currently, reports are already very underreported. It's already very unlikely. We don't want this to perpetuate. We're trying to build the incentive of you don't have the evidence to not be a thing. This is the interest of the law, right? To protect the people. Our law status quo is imperfect. It's erasing the events that occur because of something that they deem to be irrelevant or invalid. Second of all, ladies and gentlemen, our first speaker also given you the point that this is more directly impactful to vulnerable actors. And again, the victims who are imposed on by the law to provide the proof, to hire a lawyer, to make sure that they protect themselves in front of the law. And this is easier said than done. Victims are told many times that, that's not sexual harassment. So is that now not an evidence? They're just flirty. So is that now not an evidence, right? They can say like, he didn't touch you. You're just being sensitive. That's the kind of stigma that the victims are currently facing. That's the kind of stigma that the status quo have right now. And that's the kind of stigma that makes our current status quo in the opposition fail. Ladies and gentlemen, the law is what's supposed to protect the most vulnerable actor. In reality, right, this issue is already skewed enough. We have biased judges. We have biased testimonies. We have unknown evidence that the victim might not have thought of. We don't need to put this burden higher on the victim who have already experienced enough trauma. In our world, the victims are heard, the perpetrators are punished, and the extent to whether they actually get punished would be irrelevant here, because as any crime levels, that would be different. Now let's talk some comparatives, right? Our world gives priority to the most vulnerable actor, which is the victim who have experienced the trauma. Well, the perpetrators here have just the same priority as the status quo. In our world, we are solving the one reason, or one of the very reasons, that these crimes are underreported to begin with. In their world, however, they're proposing a world where the victims are less heard, because what's the status quo? They're unheard. That's what they're proposing. That's what the opposition is proposing. That the status quo, the current imperfect status quo, the very place where we're still having this problem, is supported. Ladies and gentlemen, I implore you, if you believe that the victim should be heard, that no matter how small the evidence, that it should still be valid and investigated, that this would forward the progression of how sexual harassment cases are viewed, investigated in our current world, you will support the proposition. Thank you.
All right, so I'll take notes that the second speaker from the government team spent 6 minutes and 49 seconds. So I call upon the second speaker from the opposition team, Nabil Ahmad. You may start your speech in 3, 2, 1.
Okay, so first let me introduce myself first. My name is Nabil Manzaki, and today I'm a second speaker of the opposition team. I'm going to be delivering some of the arguments and some of the rebuttals of the motion in cases of sexual harassment. This House will significantly lower the standard of evidence required to prove the crime. Firstly, by significantly reducing is only resulting in worse problem. For example, false positive and more ineffective in the system. So thus, the system needs to be improved first. This will be further explained into my arguments. Secondly, effective by having a more effective and efficient system. This is to have a more effective and efficient system. We have to at least have a proof in the law so that it could be processed more easier. And then second, and then the okay. So next one. Okay. The other side of the house saying that it is not easy to gather an evidence. They keep saying that. Okay, so let me prove it just by example. We believe that all of us bring smartphone everywhere, and just by that proof, we believe that it is easy to get an evidence because we nowadays we simply cyber. This is a quote from the famous Elon Musk saying that we simply is now a cyber just due to we bring this everywhere. And just by bringing this everywhere, this has a camera, has a microphone, and you can actually just record and just start recording. So it's that easy. And that will be further explaining to arguments also. And then they are also saying that there are mental restriction. There's also a marriage problem about marriage system. This is actually the problem that we are trying to be proposing, which is the patriarchic culture. This is the root of the problem itself, not the law that the other side of the house has said. So what we are trying to do is just to fix the culture itself, the patriarchic culture that is happening in the status quo. That will be further explained into my arguments also. There's also, for the sake of this debate, some of the acknowledgement that this side of the chamber has to acknowledge that we also agree that the victim has to be punished. But the question is that is lowering the standard is the way to do it. This is going to be This is going to be further explained also. Okay, jumping to my arguments. The first one, we believe that it's about patriarchal culture. Why we believe that instead of the low rate of report coming from the how hard it is to find an evidence, we believe that the root cause is coming from the culture that is happening right now in the society. How can they make sure that the problem is simply just by the law? They didn't explain it. They didn't explain it further. So when they are scared, how can they make sure that the problem is simply just by the law when the victim are scared to report or to even make a report at the first place, or even to call a help at the first place? So as a further justification why their side of the house fails is that they simply think that to increase the figure of reports just significantly lower the standard. Here I need to underline the notion of lowering the standard, significantly lowering the standard, just to protect the rights of the victim. While we have to remember that there are two subjects in this motion, the victim and the perpetrator. Or actually, we cannot call them perpetrator before there is an evidence, right? They also have the right to not be judged before any evidence. So both of the subject has the right. In our side of the house, we account for that. The second one, that humans are different. Not all humans are good, and that is why law emerged at the first place. The law is important because it acts as a guideline to what accepted in the society. Without it, there will be a conflict between social group and communities. It is pivotal that we have to follow them. How can they make sure that, as a research conducted in 2016, and among its finding, more than half of women, or nearly 2/3 of women aged 18 to 24, reported experience workplace a sexual harassment in their workplace. The question is that how can they make sure more than 2/3 of those women aged 18 to 24 of all of them are a valid positive case? What if all of those 2/3 women aged 18 to 24 make a report or a false report? So that will be a burden to the society. That will be burden to the government, since many of them will be false positive. People may not. Why is that valid? People may not realize that the victim find their behavior offensive. However, certainly, as soon as you have made your feelings clear by explaining how their actions make you feel, there can be no question in anybody's mind that behavior is unwanted, and as a result, any further continuation of the behavior is likely to constitute unlawful sexual harassment. By significant and lower the standard, there will be many more of the reports, but there is also many of the false positive. Sexual harassment is bad, and we are also on the victim. I cannot see okay, 6 minutes, right? And that, right, the third one is not about the law, but it's about how the government implement the law. It is the bureaucracy is too slow. The problem is not about it's too hard to find the evidence. To justify this, I'm going to be quoting, just like what I've said before, from Elon Musk, that we is simply now a cyborg. Just take your smartphone and just record, and then you can just you find your evidence. Or if you can do that, you can just you can do if you can do it at that time, you can do it afterwards. Or if you are in the if you are in the dark alleyways, you can just find nearby CCTVs, because we are now living in the digital. And then just simply by that example, we can prove that by searching for evidence is feasible, and by lowering standard, there will be too much of a false positive for an already slow bureaucracy. Thank you, and we are very proud to propose.
But I'll take note that the second speaker from the opposition team spent 7 minutes and 53 seconds. So there are few news that the first speaker from the government team is not feeling well. So the second speaker from the government team, you may please cover the third speaker. Ms. Bianca, yes? Okay. So that's the news. I will start the third speaker. The second speaker will speak again. You may start your speech in 3, 2, 1.
Ladies and gentlemen, panels, fellow debaters, what have we debated today? Today, our two teams have clashed. And first, whose interest is that we're trying to cater to, and whether it benefits that interest. Now, the first speaker of the government team have tried to convince you that that their mechanism that we have bureaucracy and have the police involved to lower the stigma would work in interest for the victim, right? Or interest for the vulnerable actors. Well, let us tell you, this is the very reason that this issue is happening in the first place, as our second speaker have said. The government team have still failed to recognize why is it that these crimes are currently underreported, that why these crimes are currently an issue, that why this is a big issue in our current world. Ladies and gentlemen, the bureaucracy of a system that currently already have stigma against victim, we argue would not work. Why? Because the stigma is not embedded in the system. It's embedded in the people. No matter how long, no matter how much you shorten it, there are still people behind these bureaucratic discussions that you've mentioned, that the opposition have proposed. There are still people behind this. And these are the very people that have the stigma that creates this problem in the first place. Ladies and gentlemen, what our house is proposing is that our house would have the law impose on these people what should be considered valid. And why should this be considered valid? Because these skewed statistics of what would be considered a valid evidence for the victim versus what is considered a valid evidence for the perpetrator is vastly different. Later in my arguments as well. Further in this rebuttal. And the first government have also mentioned that that their house is trying to cater for a better system, right? But this system that you're trying to better by tweaking on the inner works, tweaking on the people, tweaking on the number of people who passes through is still, again, the law who has failed us in the very first place. Now, while doing this, we'll also rebut the second speaker argument, in which you have mentioned about false positives. Well, let me tell you how wrong you could be. And statistics have shown that false positives, that is victims misreporting perpetrators, be it by purpose or not, is very unlikely. Or rather, the statistics between what is considered a false positive and what is considered an actual thing that happened that is unreported is vast, ladies and gentlemen. What the opposition is proposing is to cater for a very minute section of the statistics that does not cater for what actually is happening, ladies and gentlemen. Statistically, false positives or victims misreporting a perpetrator because of spite or not is very unlikely. This is what they're trying to cater for. Something that does not happen, that barely even happens in our current world. And even then, what you're trying to propose here is we're covering for people who might be lied for or might be lied on, as compared to victims who are not being believed. This is what you're trying to propose. And also, your second speaker have tried to convince that it's easy to get evidence. Well, let's talk about this, shall we? Again, the opposition is proposing that everyone would start recording when they get home. Everyone would start recording that, like, oh, I'm going to a dark alley, I'm going to bring out my phone, right? The thing is, again, that's a lot of the times what happens behind closed doors when you least expect it. It's on your way home. It's right before you attack. You're expecting people to pull out their phone and record, to gather evidence. You're saying that gathering evidence is more important than protecting yourself. That's what's most likely going to happen, ladies and gentlemen. By psychology, right? By what actually happens in a case. What happens? The person panics. The person doesn't know what to do. They try to defend themselves, right? How are they going to defend themselves? By bringing a phone. What's most likely going to happen if that's the case is nothing good's going to happen to them. What they're gonna have is court evidence, sure, but then what about themselves? What about the person? What about the person that you're ignoring here in the opposition? Right? You also say that both subjects has the right. Well, yes. Now this is where I'll be on my skewed evidence moment here, right? The current stigma or the status quo is that what a victim needs to provide for evidence versus what a perpetrator or what a perpetrator would need to provide to negate that is very skewed. If a victim have proof of communications, have video evidence, have personal witness or just a testimony from somebody, there's still a likelihood, there's still an even bigger likelihood that those evidence would not be enough. Now, I'll bring you a real life example, right? So you remember the case from a few years ago where the boy who won a sexual harassment case, despite having enough evidence against him, because he went to Harvard and he had a good future. These are the people you're letting go. These are the people that the system is currently letting go, and they're not the only one. Why does this keep happening? This is the world that the opposition is trying to propose, where just saying no, that it didn't happen would negate all the evidence to say it did. Not saying, oh no, that's a fake report, that's a fake text message. That's enough to say it did. Ladies and gentlemen, in our side of the house, where we are advocating for the victim to be looked at by the law as valid as their as should be for how valid their experience was. The law here was supposed to protect the people. The law here is supposed to protect the most vulnerable actor, in which the opposition have yet to consider. They have yet to consider how it would actually play out in the real world. They have yet to consider how the victim would actually need to record on whether this recording would actually happen or not. Ladies and gentlemen, in our side in the proposition's house, we are catering for what the world needs right now. A change in the system that has failed us. A change in the system that has yet to improve by much. And for that, we should be proud to propose. Thank you.
So the first speaker from the government team has spoken. They spent 6 minutes and 38 seconds. So I call for the third speaker from the opposition team, Fatima Zahra.
Sorry. Before we proceed, I just want to let you know that because the government team, Bianca has spoken for the second speaker and the third speaker, the reply speaker cannot be Bianca, so the reply speaker can be the first speaker. Right. You can proceed now. Thanks.
As you may have, the reply speaker from the government team will be spoken by the first speaker, which is Stephen. Yes, Stephen, you will be the reply speaker for the government team. Let's continue to the debate. I call upon the first speaker from the opposition team, Fatima Zahra. You may start your speech in 3, 2, 1.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to start my speech by rebutting some of the arguments that the government has already been keep stating and stating. First, they say that this benefits more as it allows for people to validate more cases, but they didn't even explain like what kind of valid way to prove it, like how significant they lower it. They did not define that at the first place, like how lower, like how significant, and it's very sad because that happened, right? And secondly, how they guarantee that even though there are a lot of reported cases that would prevent the false positive case. How they did not answer that. They failed to engage with us on that matter. They didn't answer what about these people? What about these people that accused for the wrong thing? Right? And they say that then how can this be protected, right? If this false positive is ignored, then a lot more victims would even be in number, right? And they keep stating that it gives benefits as it reports more, and they explain how this is underreport and not many reporting, but this is not exclusive on their side of the house, ladies and gentlemen, because with our mechanism that we have already explained before, that we would educate people, we would educate society, we would educate the police, it would even give more benefit and solve the problem for the root cause, ladies and gentlemen. And we would like to state that the main problem, the root problem in this case is not the law itself, but the people, the stigma that has been around the society, and then the bureaucracy, and then the police, and etc. that the government has to fix in the first place. Because if they do not fix that, this would not be solved. because that's the main problem that is happening, not because of the law. And we have already explained to you why it's not that hard to gather evidence, and it is even more problematic, because of the stigma itself, the patriarchy that is already been in the society for many times, and therefore we really propose for doing that rather than changing the law for like to significantly lower the evidence. And that is not measured. Like, what is the standard? What is the standard of valid evidence, right? And I would like to say that they say that this bureaucracy, the stigma, doesn't work because it's embedded in the people. But why? But even worse, that if you took the trade-off of not taking this opportunity to like change the stigma, but rather than just changing the law and impacting more people, and we have already stated that we are also care for the vulnerable actors, which is the victims, and we do not want more victims to like increase the number. And this also includes the victims, as in the people who is misaccused or like has positive report, ladies and gentlemen. And they only care about one side of the victim. They only cared about just this people that have been through the sexual harassment, but they do not care about the victim that is misaccused or has false positive report, ladies and gentlemen. Well, we care for kind of victims. We care for the vulnerable actors without picking them, ladies and gentlemen. I have already proven to you that why the law is not wrong, because we believe that by changing the culture and utilizing government assistance, for example, a massive advertisement call, we need an assistance, and we have already said the mechanism that we propose to you, right, ladies and gentlemen. And we've already explained why that changing the law even brings more harm than good. Because as we've already said before, because moving on, because we've already said that the people are different, right? People are different. And there are also many cases that is misreported. And first I would like to say that what we have already said before, that first, humans are different, right? We have already stated to you, not all humans are good. And that's why law is emerged at the first place, right, ladies and gentlemen? And it is important that we enforce this law and changing the wrong thing instead. I also believe that this happened because of the patriarchy culture. So without even solving the root cause itself, we're not solving the problem, ladies and gentlemen. So it's, of course, a lot better to like solve the problem itself. And ladies and gentlemen, we have already bring example that proof is easy, like because we are like we are cyber, like what my second speaker has already stated, and because it's not about the law, but it's about the implementation of the law itself. So we better enforce the law, like improve the hierarchy so that it would be even easier for them to report and like support the victims, and changing the stigma in society. It would even be more impactful, and we have already proven to you right that. And ladies and gentlemen, I am going to tell you a comparison, our case and their case. Ladies and gentlemen, on the worst case scenario, on their side of the house is more sexual harassment is reported, but many false positive cases, making a lot more victim. So it won't be solve the problem, protecting them, but increase the number of victims who got justice. But in contrast, from outside the house, okay, we might have stagnant sexual harassment, but we do not add more victims. So we care. And our best case, we can protect correctly, easier bureaucracy, friendlier society, and not little to positive victims to be accused. Thank you.
But that was the third speaker from the opposition team. And I spent 7 minutes and 38 seconds. So since there are no substantive speakers left, I will call the two reply speakers from each team. So first reply speaker, the Inaya from the opposition team, you may please start your speech in 3, 2, 1.
This debate came down to two questions. First, which proposal is more principally okay to be done? And secondly, how it is more effective, which one is more effective in order to get the justice for the victims and the perpetrators, right? Firstly, on the idea of like, how can we say that it is better under our side of the house to not lowering the standard of the evidence required to prove the crime. We have proven to you that this standard exists because it is an urgent to compare, to make a link between the crimes and evidence and the individuals involved, right? We're not saying that the victims have to we're not saying that we don't accept like but under government side of the house, when they accept, for example, every little details, every little evidence, for example, it can only make worse. It can only worsening the situation. What we want here is that for the process of this reporting can be more easier and effective, right? But when there are more evidence, more people report with just simple evidence that they think it can be valid under the eye of the judge, for example, we say that it is more will only more problematic because this evidence have to be validated. It has to be like cross-check first if it is true or not, right? Because it can lead to false positivity, as like what my previous speakers has stated to you, that it is really harmful because it can even make more victims that we don't want under our side of the house, right? And secondly, because of this, it's the government side has stated that we're not with the victims we're not supporting the victims who are not believed with the evidence they have, for example, who are not whose problem is not processed, for example. Under our side of the house, exactly because of this, we want them to be more efficient and effective in reporting their cases, for example. Like when the system itself is not effective enough, we say that it is only bring more problem. And for example, like it's only stuck in the police, for example. Like even if the police accept it, for example, it's only just making things longer and longer, and like in the end of the day, the victims themselves do not already forget about it, for example. But we said that in the current status quo, when these victims already have like the places or like platforms to share about about their problems, for example, is also it's not only exclusive on the government side of the house where they can have more victims who do the report itself, right? And secondly, on we believe that secondly on how it is more it's better and more effective, right? We believe that it is about the patriotic culture, where we believe that instead of the low rate of a report coming from how hard it is to find evidence, we believe that the root cause of this is coming from the societies, the things that currently happening. How can they make sure that the problem is simply just by the law when the stakeholders are not actually do the jobs, for example, right? As the further justification of why their side of the house fails is that they simply think that to increase the figure of reports, they can just significantly lower the standard itself, right? So that we believe that under our side house, we can make the victims get justice for both sides, and our opposition has to win. Thank you.
So the first reply speaker from the opposition then has spoken, and they spent 4 minutes and 26 seconds. So I call upon the second reply speaker, the reply speaker from the government team, which has been changed to Mr. Steven. Mr. Steven, are you there? Yes, so Mr. Steven, you may please start your speech in 3, 2, 1. Sorry. Please pause the time. Steven, you are not audible right now. Please you check your mic, please. Ladies and gentlemen, please wait for the second reply speaker, Mr. Steven. No, not yet. You're not audible yet. Oh, you are still not audible.
Is this audible?
Yes. Now you're audible.
Oh, okay. Sorry for the little delay. Okay.
So I will restart the countdown. You may start your speech in 3, 2, 1.
Good evening, panelists and colleagues and opponents. So, yes, after that, in case of sexual harassment, we will stand again. We will again stand with our house that we need to lower the evidence standards so that our victims can always have more priority and a better way. So for what of this, our motion is more beneficial for our vulnerable actors that are the victims, whether that they know it or not. We do know that it is, yes, what we believe, that a few points that we believe is bureaucracy and erasing stigma, but keeping the status quo. What we know about, they are one of the many sources of this flawed system. By doing so, changing to a better system, we will finally be able to think. We are now able to prevent more sexual harassment based on the minimalist report that now are needed. I do need to appreciate to the opponent's arguments. They're wonderful. I truly appreciate them, but unfortunately, I still have to stay strong to our ideas and decisions. I do appreciate, but I strongly disagree with our opponents. Sorry, I think, sorry. Yes, I strongly disagree with our opponents. I do appreciate it though. But now, what we think do is we have shown you why this beneficial for the issues at heart underreported sexual evidence. Our victims are always vulnerable, are heard. They didn't consider the real characteristic of the crime, perpetrators and victims. They fail to judge the weight of the statistics they are trying to propose. They fail to understand why this is an issue worth debating in the first place. We have given you real life examples why their mechanism won't work with the actual real life. The one who considers the most vulnerable actors and how they're impacted by current law and requirements. And with that, I will close my speech here. Sorry if there's anything wrong. Good evening.
Well, that was the last reply speaker from the government team, and they spent 4 minutes and 5 seconds. All right, that must conclude our debate for tonight. So we saw some great action here in this chamber English 1, and clearly saw that both teams have been doing their best to win this debate. And since this round is a silent round, all the debaters in this chamber, you may please return to the main room for breaking announcement. My name is Muhammad Ihsan Pasha, and that is all for me tonight. And thank you all for coming for this round of the debate. I'll see you guys in the next round. See you guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Such a
everyone.
good debate.